Hey, Alysa, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, I loved your post the other day
Oh,
about the low-flying satellite cameras.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, look, New York Times had some good pieces, and that one just really struck me.
Yeah, it's a couple. Yeah, look, well, yeah. So they're on it. The New York Times is on it, right? They're on this issue. I read your piece and well, there's a number of things I loved about it. I love the comments that people jumped on, which we should talk about. But I loved firstly your idea that, hey, the FTC is our de facto privacy regulator. And I don't know if everybody knows that. Like when I read it, I'm like, I wouldn't have thought that a couple months ago, but now it's absolutely true. Like, tell us about that.
Well, so one, we know this, we don't have a national federal privacy law, right? But, and we've talked about this before, we do have consumer protection, and privacy has always really come out of consumer protection. And the Federal Trade Commission, that is our regulator that enforces consumer protection type issues, right? When kind of the old world of fraud, but we've evolved to false advertising and unfair billing and all different types of interactions commercially with consumers that don't strike the right chord. And data practices really just came about within that. That said, the FTC has jurisdictional limits. And so you've got these other agencies too that have a little small piece that one would say based on their jurisdiction where privacy is relevant, they have a hook. But by the numbers, like who's making policy based on enforcement, based on business guidance, that's the FTC.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it just kind of dawned on me. Like, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get back to the issue. The issue you raised was low-flying satellite cameras, taking photos, taking imagery, and it seemed to me that okay, so innovations it's growing at this breakneck pace, but the data controls for it are way behind, right? And this is what you talked about in your piece, like the whole like, hey, we're going to look at this case by case and approve new customers
Well,
right, the asymmetry was just huge, I thought.
yeah, well, so you always hear the FTC, for example, saying, they are equipped to evolve as technology evolves. But I'm going to go back, they have jurisdictional limits. And so when you have new technology that really is in the jurisdiction of another federal agency, whether it's drones, whether it's FAA or FCC, which is what I was referring to, like you just don't have the privacy bench strength in those agencies that have been thinking about this for years, that have had, just really building blocks to get to this evolved technology and the kind of privacy issues. So it's a desert, really. It's relying on discretion, it's relying on best practices, but a lot of the just the business brain power, they're very good at creating the new technology, right? The low flying, more precise imagery, but they're dabbling in privacy. And so they don't black letter, like when you're a startup, you got to be smart with where you put your resources, and really laying on heavy on compliance usually is not in that top 3 list. And so, when I read that article and it was really some light touch, I'll have some contract terms, we'll do some scouting to make sure that those who we hire, right, are doing the right thing. But it's relying on paper. And if I look at where we've seen the FTC or state attorneys general enforce on that, there's a much higher expectation as to what you would need to do. And so just that imbalance between here's what this technology can and is able to do, and here are the controls around that, thinking about and how do we protect consumer privacy. And it was not, not balanced.
And we're seeing that in a lot of places. Facial recognition. It also reminds me of, the robocalls that were, the Biden was telling people to come vote, all that stuff. And then to your point, B2B satellite businesses are FCC rather than FTC. So you have this like,
Well, you've got FCC and I mean, it's even split there between the FCC and the FAA, not really strong bastions of privacy. And I would say that's when you talk about biometrics or deep fake voices, like we actually do have a pretty extensive set of regulations. Yes, it might be split among several agencies, but there are a lot of laws and rules that already regulate that. So that could fit within it. I think when we're talking about space, right, air, or that's not an area we've focused so much on letting that business, that industry evolve, that privacy regulation has not really fit within that framework.
so so for example, on the AI generated robocalls that were impersonating Biden, and the Democrats were calling for regulation of that. And then the FCC came out and said, all right, well, we've done it. Here's the regulation. But actually, they just did it for voice calls. It didn't deal with video. So, like, is that an example of, hey, there's some fragmentation here on who does what?
Well, there is fragmentation, right? So they can do that within their existing statutory powers, and they've got the TCPA. They've already been able to regulate pre-recorded messages. So that's why that just fit already within, right? It was extra clarification, but around an existing set of rules around how you can engage in those practices. The FTC, where kind of the FCC lifts off, the FTC picks up. And so they have, of course, their telemarketing sales rule, but also their unfair and deceptive trade practices. And then you can layer on that, you've got the states. I'm just going to go back. Like then when you're talking about air, the states are less relevant. You have preemption on that front. So yes, there's some common law right to privacy, but it's a lot less crowded when it comes to the type of rules, specific granular rules that apply to that practice.
I gotcha. So that reminds me, there was a great comment on that thread where someone said, okay, well, I get you on the low-flying drones, but what about Meta and Apple glasses, right? Like the Vision Pro, for example. Aren't they, I don't know if they're actually out there collecting data, and we probably have the capability to record and see and check out the environment. For me, there's two pieces there. Like one is, okay, now we're just voluntarily putting these glasses on and we can see everything. What happens there? That's not a government entity doing that, right?
So without commenting on any specific company, what I would say is like when you have a company that's been in the consumer space, that has dealt with privacy backlash, that really has had to account for all of the kind of unanticipated privacy issues, that is much more in a privacy by design. We may not know it as consumers. That means we got to scratch the surface and understand what they've done for privacy. But my sense is privacy has really spent a lot of time on the development of those products before they're ever go to market at this stage. I just see that as very different when we're talking in a commercial space, right? Like in this case, the company selling to various governments as like main purchasers. Privacy is just a lighter touch on that front.
Yeah. And the other piece of it is, which it's not that you're just like looking out in these glasses. I think they're looking in. What I mean by that is one of the topics I've been fascinated with is this idea that we can see better now, like things like pupil dilation and people's like responses to messages. I mean, the other day I was on a call and I did a thing like that, and Apple popped up the little thinking emoji, right? And I thought, all right, that's cool, that's cute. But I'm like, how did you do that? I mean, it's cool, but that seems like you've been training on a lot of faces to
Well,
get to that point. Is that all you're doing? A little cute thing?
Well, to close the loop on that point, so that's AI, right? We're talking about
Yeah.
what the data we're using to train AI. And the FTC put out that, hey guys, reminder, right? When you update your privacy policy and you're quietly noting that you are now using all this data that you previously collected to train AI in different ways, you got to think about unfair and deceptive practices. It isn't always the case, right? They're really focusing on material changes, but it goes to what kind of data are you using, and are you now using it for a materially new purpose that somebody could not have known? And biometric data, for example, right? That's a really important component. So I
Mhm.
just think there are we're saying you can see so clearly in terms of what's on the ground. Well, like the regulators are also looking very intentionally at how data is being used for new purposes and the sensitivity of that. So I just think it's fascinating kind of what's around the corner on all of these issues and what kind of new, I don't know whether it's enforcement, it's litigation, but I see lots of fireworks ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, we touched on a number of like ton of different varied things here. What's a good takeaway?
Privacy by design,
Just
honestly,
do it,
like
right? Just do it when yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, you're pulling in, you're thinking about this at the very end, it's already baked. Like you're putting a Band-Aid on it as opposed to really thinking about, I need to think about this, the people behind this data, and I really need to think about that experience from the consumer and what am I doing with this data? And do I have like, is it legitimate, right? Have I really accounted for in today's modernized world? Do I have the right permissions that I need to be able to use this data? Do I have the right transparency? Are there things that I don't actually need all this data? I need some parts of this data, or in fact, I can use synthetic, I can use it synthetic. Like there's different ways to account for some of the privacy concerns that I think we're not really deeply thought before, but probably need to be now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And then the whole public-private thing, which we didn't really talk about, what's public data, what's private data. I'm with you. Thanks, Alysa. I really appreciate this. We're going to post that thread. I loved it so much. And let's see if anyone has any further comments on that. All right. Have a good one.